Scene 1 of Burn So Bright opens in a restless interior space, with Kenna's sleepless tossing signaling not lust or anticipation, but the residue of a summer that rearranged her sense of self, a familiar feeling for many women who have tasted possibility and then returned to routine. And this emotional dissonance becomes the true engine of the scene as she moves from private memory into the public cadence of work. At the office, the invitation from Lisa, framed as gratitude rather than pursuit, captures a subtle but recognizable dynamic for queer women. Desire often arrives disguised as politeness, mentorship, or professional admiration, because society still teaches women, especially younger ones, to soften want into gratitude. Kenna's agreement feels casual, yet charged, and her choice to bring Lisa home rather than to a bar quietly resists the expected scripts of consumption and performance, opting instead for a space where conversation, vulnerability, and attention can unfold without spectacle. What develops between them is not a rush toward physicality, but a slow recognition, a mutual noticing that resonates deeply with lesbian audiences who understand how attraction between women often grows through listening rather than conquest. Lisa's openness about her uncertainty around accounting is not incidental. It mirrors Kenna's own unresolved longing and positions Lisa as a younger reflection of the crossroads Kenna once faced, allowing the scene to explore intimacy as a form of shared self-inquiry rather than escape. Kenna's encouragement for Lisa to pursue her dream carries the weight of regret and projection, revealing how queer women often become each other's witnesses and catalysts, urging bravery in others when they have learned, painfully, the cost of silence in themselves. This dynamic centers women's experiences of ambition and fear, especially within systems that reward compliance and punish deviation, and it underscores how mentorship can blur into intimacy when emotional honesty is allowed to exist without hierarchy. The growing closeness in Kenna's home is defined by trust and curiosity rather than urgency, and this deliberate pacing challenges a cultural discomfort with women's desire by refusing to frame it as impulsive or predatory. Instead, it is thoughtful, mutual, and grounded in conversation. When Kenna offers to show Lisa her room, the gesture is symbolic as much as spatial, an invitation into the private self she has kept guarded since her mischance with Kuliana, and the kiss that follows functions less as climax than as acknowledgement, a quiet agreement that what they are sharing matters. Importantly, the scene does not erase Kenna's past but allows it to surface organically as her mention of Kuliana reframes the moment as layered rather than substitutive, reflecting how queer women often carry past loves as unfinished sentences that inform present connections. This honesty resists a narrative that demands emotional purity or linear healing, instead honoring the truth that desire can coexist with grief and memory without diminishing either. For many LGBTQ+ viewers, Kenna's confession will resonate as a moment of visibility, naming the ache of dreams deferred by fear, timing, or societal pressure, and Lisa's attentive presence models how care can exist without demanding resolution. The scene also speaks to women more broadly by interrogating how often they are taught to shrink their ambitions, delay joy, or justify wanting more, and by showing how intimacy can be a space where those lessons are gently unlearned. Society's discomfort with seeing women choose each other, especially outside of male framing or validation, persists because such choices threaten hierarchies that rely on women's emotional labor being directed elsewhere, yet Burn So Bright counters this by depicting connection as a source of clarity rather than chaos. Kenna embodies the tension between self-protection and openness, having learned to survive by minimizing her own desires, while Lisa represents curiosity and courage not yet dulled by compromise. And their interaction mirrors the real-world pressures queer women face to either lead cautiously or leap boldly, often without a map. By centering emotional intimacy, career doubts, shared regrets, quiet encouragement, the film refuses to reduce their bond to novelty or taboo, insisting instead on its ordinariness and depth. The absence of voyeuristic framing allows the audience to sit with the truth of the moment, that being seen, really seen, can be as transformative as being touched. In this way, the scene advocates for a vision of lesbian connection rooted in authenticity, where desire is inseparable from respect and self-discovery, and where becoming visible is not about spectacle but about finally allowing oneself to burn honestly, brightly, and without apology. Scene 2 of Burn So Bright rewinds time to a quieter but heavier moment, when Kenna returns home carrying the fresh weight of grief after settling her father's affairs, and the chaos she finds in her own living space immediately underscores how little room society gives women to mourn cleanly or privately, especially when they are expected to remain gracious and accommodating. April's frantic presence, chasing the exuberant Kuliana through the house, reads at first as a violation of trust. And Kenna's anger is not just about boundaries, but about the ache of coming home changed while the world has kept moving without her permission. This emotional dissonance resonates deeply with queer audiences who know how grief can isolate, making even friendship feel intrusive. And Kenna's reaction reflects a common survival instinct. When loss has hollowed you out, noise feels like threat. April's attempt to smooth things over is imperfect but human, and her introduction of Kuleana as a free spirit immediately positions Kuleana as a counterweight to Kenna's contained sorrow, not as an object of temptation, but as a symbol of life still in motion. Kenna's request that both women stay the night is one of the scene's most revealing gestures, because it is not rooted in desire but in fear of being alone, capturing a truth many women understand. Sometimes intimacy begins as a plea for presence rather than romance. Later, as night settles and the three women talk, Kuleana's story about losing herself backstage at a concert functions less as a wild anecdote and more as a quiet philosophy of living unguarded. And when she casually mentions the joy of collective connection, it sparks something in Kenna that has been dormant under responsibility and restraint. This moment is particularly meaningful through a queer lens, because it frames self-discovery not as rebellion but as curiosity, a wondering about what might exist beyond the narrow scripts grief and adulthood have handed her. Kenna's admission that she might have been missing out is not about sex or excess, but about experience, about the possibility that there are ways of being with others that do not require self-erasure or stoicism. The decision for the three of them to retreat to the bedroom is presented not as escalation but as shelter, a shared space away from the expectations of composure, where vulnerability can exist without explanation. By keeping the focus on emotional atmosphere rather than action, the scene challenges the cultural discomfort with women gathering, choosing closeness, and redefining intimacy on their own terms, a discomfort rooted in the fear that women who support and explore each other's inner worlds are less controllable. For lesbian viewers, Kuleana's presence may feel familiar as the person who enters your life at a fragile moment and unknowingly opens a door you did not yet have the language to name, while Kenna embodies the woman taught to be careful, dutiful, and self-contained, even when her heart is breaking. April occupies a quieter but important role as the bridge between them, representing how queer discovery often happens within existing networks of trust rather than dramatic chance encounters. This scene also speaks to women broadly by validating the messy overlap of grief and awakening, challenging the notion that mourning must look solemn or solitary, and instead suggesting that connection itself can be a form of survival. Society often struggles with stories like this because they refuse to punish women for wanting comfort, novelty, or closeness in moments of loss, especially when that closeness is between women and not filtered through male approval. Burn So Bright uses this temporal step backward to show that Kenna's later hesitations are not born from coldness, but from the vulnerability of this earlier night, when she briefly allowed herself to be seen without armor. In centering quiet gestures, shared presence, and emotional curiosity, the scene honors a truth many queer women recognize. Becoming visible often begins not with certainty, but with grief-softened openness, and the brave decision to let others sit beside you in the dark. In this way, the scene reframes intimacy as something earned through honesty rather than confidence, reminding viewers that softness is not weakness, but a radical choice in a world that urges women to harden themselves. Kenna's tentative curiosity, Kuleana's unself-conscious openness, and April's flawed loyalty form a triangle of care that resists easy labels, mirroring how many queer women first encounter possibility through friendship before desire has a name. By allowing grief and wonder to coexist, the film affirms that healing does not require forgetting, only the courage to remain present, and that sometimes the first step toward becoming oneself is simply admitting that being alone is too heavy to carry. It invites audiences to trust quiet beginnings and honor moments that change everything without spectacle. Forever. Scene 3 of Burn So Bright unfolds with the quiet ache of time passing, showing Kenna and Kuleana settling into a rhythm that looks from the outside like the beginning of love, but from within is already strained by histories, expectations, and the unequal weight women are so often taught to carry. Their growing closeness is marked not by spectacle, but by confession, especially when Kenna opens up about her childhood, her mother's death, and the way she was forced into adulthood early, becoming a surrogate parent to her siblings before she ever had the chance to be simply herself. A story that resonates deeply with queer audiences who recognize how responsibility and self-sacrifice are frequently baked into women's identities long before desire is allowed to surface. Kenna's vulnerability in sharing this history is an act of trust, yet it also explains her fear of instability, her clinging to a job she dislikes not because it fulfills her, but because it represents safety, control, and proof that she can survive loss by staying busy and needed. Kuleana, by contrast, embodies freedom and motion, urging Kenna to quit the job she hates and step into a life defined by feeling rather than obligation. And while this desire is rooted in love, it also exposes a fault line familiar to many queer relationships, where one woman's healing path feels like another woman's threat. The animosity that grows between them is not born of cruelty but of misalignment, as Kenna feels burdened by being the financial anchor and resents what she perceives as Kuleana's bohemian detachment, while Kuleana feels unseen, fearing that Kenna's devotion to work is a stand-in for emotional distance. This tension speaks to broader societal pressures placed on women to justify their worth through productivity, and to queer women in particular, who often feel they must prove stability to be taken seriously, even at the cost of joy. When Kourtney challenges Kenna's claim that she loves her more than her job and asks for proof, the demand is heartbreaking because it reflects a longing to be chosen fully, a desire many queer viewers will recognize as sharpened by a world that so often treats women's love as secondary or provisional. The moment Kenna comes home to find Kourtney packing is not framed as betrayal but as inevitability, the culmination of unspoken fears finally given form, and Kourtney's request that Kenna leave with her the next morning is less an ultimatum than a final offering of possibility, a chance to choose love over fear. Their kiss in this moment carries the weight of everything unsaid, embodying the truth that sometimes desire burns brightest at the edge of loss, and that knowing you love someone does not always mean you know how to follow them. Kenna's decision to stay is devastating precisely because it is understandable. Shaped by a lifetime of caretaking, she cannot yet imagine a self not defined by responsibility, and this internal conflict mirrors the real-world experience of many women who feel trapped between survival and authenticity. Kourtney's departure, then, is not a failure of love but a refusal to shrink herself into waiting, challenging the cultural expectation that women, especially queer women, should endure indefinitely in the name of devotion. The film's choice to let Kourtney leave without villainizing her is a radical act of empathy, affirming that choosing oneself is not cruelty, even when it hurts someone you love. The final beat, with Kenna re-embracing Kourtney, suggests not replacement but continuation, hinting that love is not a finite resource and that growth often comes in cycles rather than straight lines. For lesbian audiences, this ending resonates as painfully real, reflecting how queer love stories are often shaped by timing and courage as much as chemistry, and how becoming visible sometimes requires walking away from something beautiful before you are ready to sustain it. For women more broadly, the scene speaks to the cost of emotional labor, the fear of abandoning roles that have kept us safe, and the longing to be loved without condition or proof. Society's discomfort with stories like this persists because they refuse to punish women for complexity. They allow women to be loving and flawed, nurturing and resentful, brave and afraid, all at once. Burn So Bright uses this scene to argue that authenticity is not about perfect choices, but about honest ones, and that love, when it truly burns bright, leaves marks even when it does not last. In honoring both Kenna's hesitation and Kourtney's refusal to wait, the film validates the messy, non-linear journeys of queer women, reminding viewers that even when love ends, its heat can illuminate the path forward, making it possible, one day, for love to burn so bright again.